afternoon. My name is Was Rahman. I work with and for Open to Export. As you all know, Open to Export is the free online community for exporters, and we're here to provide people with help, advice, support and connections on how to get started and how to succeed in export. We've got quite a lot of people today. I think we're around 100 people dialed in, so welcome all of you. As you all know, hopefully you know, this is the first of a program of 4 webinars that we're putting together under the label of our Export Bootcamp, how to get your export plan in shape for 2014. We're very pleased to be supported by 3 organisations that have helped us get through our first year and succeed through 2014. The Federation of Small Businesses, the Marketing Solutions and Websites provider HIBU, and of course the Institute of Export, where my colleague Mike Josypenko from the Institute of Export will be speaking in the next few minutes. I'm going to be introducing Mike in a moment. While we're waiting for the last few people to come on board, I'm going to run up a small poll just to get a sense of who we've got on the audience today. So I'm going to put up something that allows you to answer the question of which stage you're at your export journey, and that's coming up now. And what you should be able to do is click on any of the buttons that describe where you are in your export journey. Are you considering export? Are you reacting to orders? Are you actually going out and seeking international business, or you're already exporting at the moment? That'll give us a sense of the audience that we have. And while we're waiting for that, my colleague Mike Josypenko is going to be speaking any minute now. Mike is from the Institute of Export, and he's someone who's got many years of experience. We've worked with Mike many times, and I think you'll find today's session very useful. What he's going to be talking about are the 10 basic steps to export success. We'll split the session into 2 halves, talking about some of the basics of how you know whether you're ready and how to figure that out, and secondly, some of the practical issues that happen once you're ready. But at the moment, I'm going to close the poll and let you see the answers. And what we've got so far is a reasonable split between people that are thinking about it, people that are going out looking, and people that are already well on the way, with a few people reacting to incoming orders. I'm going to stop for a moment. When Mike starts, there is the opportunity to ask questions, but the way we do it on the webinar, those of you that are listening should see a small window in your panel that asks you, gives you the chance to type questions in. If you want to type questions in, I'll see them, and then we'll put them to Mike either as he's speaking or at the end. And of course, those of you that are registered on Open to Export can put your questions directly onto the website through the Q&A forum, and Mike will be around afterwards and over the next couple of days to keep answering them, along with our panels of experts and service providers. Anyway, I'm going to pass over to Mike now. So, Gemma, if you could pass control of the slides over to Mike so that we can see his slides, we can get going. Mike, is that all right?
Thank you very much, yes.
Mike has control now.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Josypenko, and I'm going to be, when I get the slides up and running, I'm going to be talking to you about preparing to get started on exporting. Gemma, I'm sorry, I'm still not getting it at the moment.
Okay, Mike, just bear with us one moment. Can you click down on your slides once, please? There you go, you've got it.
I beg your pardon, sorry. Okay, so as was mentioned, my name is Mike Josypenko. I work for the Institute of Export and International Trade. So what we're going to be looking at this afternoon, 10 key factors that you should be thinking about if you are considering exporting. So looking at the slide there, why should I export, and am I ready to export? We're then going to have a couple of slides of looking at products or services to see how you can get a feel for how much potential there is for exporting. And then a couple of basic questions around you and exporting for the first time. We're going to then take a short break, and then we're going to look at some of the things that you need to be thinking of, assuming you do decide to get exporting. So what knowledge do you need? What are the first steps? Finding new customers, etc. So first of all, why should you export? Well, a lot of research and a lot of statistics do show that companies who export are generally more successful. So there are a variety of reasons, benefits from exporting, the main one of which I suppose is it increases your revenue and your profitability, increases your levels of growth, your productivity, and gives you greater economies of scale. It can also allow you to spread your business risk, so you're not putting all of your eggs in one basket. You're covered in case one market sees a downturn. Can increase the life of your products, or give you a better return on your R&D investment. And of course, having an international profile actually brings secondary benefits as well. If you've got domestic customers that suddenly realize that you're getting an international presence, that adds to your credibility to do more business in home markets. So a lot of people ask this question, am I ready to export? Well, there's no black and white answer to this. I think in some ways starting to export is a little bit about like deciding whether to start a family or not. There's always a good reason for putting it off for another 12 months, but sometimes you just got to make the decision and get on with it. And like starting a new family, beginning to export can be a fairly long and time-consuming road, but it can be infinitely rewarding once you do get started on it. As a general rule, I think most businesses will tend to start exporting once they've established a good base in their domestic market. It doesn't have to be that way, but it is very useful because you do need to be able to allocate time and resources to do it. There are companies that start exporting pretty much from day one, or certainly from the very early stages, either because their product is really geared towards overseas markets, they may not have much of a domestic market, or because their business is in the business of exporting itself. So there are always exceptions, don't be bound by that, but you will need to be able to dedicate time, manpower and financial support to get involved actively in exporting. So one of the key questions you need to consider is there any demand out there for my product or service overseas? Well, the simple rule of thumb there is look at what you do best. What drives your home market? What's your USP? And will that work in overseas countries? I tend to start from the basic point of view that most goods and services will have some level of demand internationally, but obviously there are various factors that can affect that. One way of assessing the level of potential is to look at your competitors out there. Are you surrounded by competitors that do trade internationally while you're left trading only at home? Do you get inquiries for your product either when you're exhibiting at a UK trade show, or do you get inquiries on your website? That will be a guideline as to how much interest there is. And obviously when you're looking at your product and service as it is at the moment, the ideal situation you can find yourself in is if you can find that there is a good demand for your product as it stands in its current format. That way you've got pretty much a tailor-made product. You may need some minor alterations to the product before it can be sold overseas. That may be in terms of labeling, packaging, slight tailoring of colour schemes, etc., depending on what your product or service is. But it's pretty much good to go. Alternatively, you may need to make some more serious adaptations to your product to cope with markets, overseas markets, and that can be either in terms of style, it could be responding to regulatory restrictions. So you may have to adapt the product in overseas markets. Obviously, the hardest situation you can find yourself in is to try and generate an overseas market for a new product that's completely unknown there. That tends to be very, very difficult to do. Although it's not unknown, it can be done, but you need to have a pretty good marketing budget. It tends to happen most often where you've got a product, a particular consumer product, that's very fashion conscious, perhaps something that's attracted the attention of the social media, which tends to be pretty much international and create international demand instantly. But otherwise it can be difficult to build demand for a brand new product. So when you're looking at this, do a SWOT analysis. Look at the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats. You may have, in principle, a demand for your product, but it may be undermined by various factors. One of those could be price pressure in overseas markets. So that could just simply be the number of competitors, strong competitors in the market. It could be aggravated by the cost of transporting goods into a foreign market, particularly if you've got a low-value product that has relatively high transport costs. You're going to be at a competitive disadvantage compared to local players. There may be import duty issues. You may be facing high levels of import duty that, again, will put you at a competitive disadvantage against local companies. Or there may be other issues around that. There may be issues around compatibility in local markets. It may not be to the local styles, the tastes, colour schemes. Perhaps there are size issues. If you're trying to sell a product that's based around metric sizes into a market like the USA, which by and large still tends to work in imperial measurements, you may have some problems there. Or there may be government or regulatory issues. So apart from high import customs duties, there may be issues around product standards or testing requirements. There may be restrictions on some products for import licensing and controls on the amount of product that can be imported into a country. So a variety of factors to consider. So assuming you think you've got some potential for your product, what do you need to get started? Well, as I said earlier, one of the most important factors that you will need to have is a stable business environment. Exporting is going to take time, it's going to take effort, it's going to take some money, so you need to be able to spare those. If you're in a situation where you're running and working a 6.5-day week simply to keep your business running on the domestic front, you should seriously ask yourself whether you've got the capacity to get involved in exporting. You need to have the physical capacity to scale up your business in production facilities, the ability to cope financially, the staffing capacity to undertake additional roles in international trade, whether that's actually doing the sales themselves, whether it's doing research in overseas markets, managing clients, or simply doing the administration once the orders start coming in. Somebody has to deal with that, so you've got to take that into account. You need to have the financial support. So first of all, you need to have the support available or the money available to allocate to a proactive export sales campaign, bearing in mind that you may have to visit overseas markets several times over the course of a sales campaign before you start making serious inroads. It can be a long haul. You also need to think that when you do start getting orders, you may have to finance that business, so you need to have that capacity in your locker. So you need to have that stable business environment. A helpful factor when you're starting to export is to have a good solid brand, product awareness. Even if it's only in your home market, the fact that you are well established at home can go a long way to helping you internationally. You may have potential clients overseas that are subsidiaries or known to your domestic clients. Perhaps you can use that as a starting point. And the fact that your brand is established in your home market or in a niche market. For instance, if you're involved in the oil and gas industry and you've got a good reputation in the UK oil and gas industry, that will go a long way to establishing your credibility in overseas markets. It's useful to have a website that's optimized for international trade, and that's not only a question of translating the content on the screen, it's actually making it fit for purpose so that A, it can be recognized and read by buyers overseas, but also so that it attracts the interest. It has points of reference that will draw consumers or trade buyers into it. And that is an art in itself, and that's something where you can get help from government department, which we'll come on to later. But the most important thing of all, I think, that you need to have is a commitment to succeed. It's not going to happen overnight in most cases. It is going to take time, it's going to take determination, and you've got to be committed to succeeding. If you decide you're going to start exporting now and you find you have a good quarter, if you start backing out and saying, oh, well, we'll leave it 12 months, then you're going to close the door on yourself. You're not going to be able to just go back and go away and come back to it in 12 months' time. So you need to be committed to exporting. Which begs the question, how long is it going to take me to see a return on my investment? Well, an export order can happen anytime. You can get an order while you're listening to this webinar on your website. But obviously making that penetration into a market takes time. A lot of overseas markets tend to be fairly conservative in outlook. They may give you an initial trial, but before they trust you as a major supplier, they're going to want to see what you're capable of. They're going to want to know about you, your company, your products, the commitment, the long-term commitment, the after-sales, the service. And also they're going to want to build a relationship in many cases. Customers buy from suppliers. They buy from individuals rather than the companies. So you're going to need to establish a relationship and build a presence in that market. You're going to need to be going out there several times, whether it's for research, for sales, or if you appoint a local partner, you're going to be supporting that partner with sales activities, training, with presence on the ground. So it is going to take time, and you've got to be aware of that. So at this point, we're going to take another poll, so I'll hand you back to Woz for a few moments.
Thanks very much. So the poll now is just to get a sense of where people go for the information on exporting. And as you'll see, one of the questions, or one of the options that we've got is UKTI. As you're probably very aware, we wouldn't be where we are without the support of UKTI, who've been a key part of today's webinar. So thanks to all our colleagues and friends at UKTI. If the rest of you could do what many of you are already doing, which is click on the places where you'd go for your advice and information on exporting, that's going to give us a sense of what you're looking at. It also helps us with our next set of webinars. As you know, over the next 6 weeks, we'll be doing a series of 4. The next one, next Tuesday, is all about country selection and launch strategy. That should be a place where a lot of you that have asked questions on specific countries will get some very detailed answers. We've got a session on the 6th of March on pricing, regulation, and fulfilling your first order. And then at the end, on the 20th of March, we're going to be hearing some case studies from some champion exporters that have put all this together. So there's that, and as I mentioned, some of the other questions we've had through, I'm suggesting that people put those onto the Open to Export Q&A forum, because there'll be a whole community of folks that can answer very specific questions. If I close the poll for now and share the results, what you get is a fair mix of where people look, and I think that gives us a fair amount of indication of the sorts of channels that the people start to use. At this stage, Mike, I'm going to pass you back so that we can get on with a few more. There are a few questions coming in, so it's up to you whether you want to leave a bit of space at the end for questions or whether you want me to ask them as they go. But let's get back to
Can we do those towards the end? Because you may find that there are questions about things that are going to be covered on the next slide, perhaps.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much for that, Woz, and thank you all for voting on that poll. So we've looked at considering whether you're ready to export. So assuming that you come out of that feeling that you are ready to export, we'll have a look at a couple of issues on where do you go from here. Sorry. So where do you start? Well, the first step you need to take is looking into new markets. And I would stress here, when you start thinking about new markets to target, don't be too ambitious. Some people start thinking they're going to take on the world. They start looking at all of Europe, North America, etc. My advice is always to start relatively small. Pick 1, 2 markets as a maximum and focus on those. Otherwise, you're in danger of spreading yourself too thinly. Now, that market may be a large market. You may think that the USA is your starting point, or even China. That's a realistic decision for you to make, but make it on practical grounds. Don't simply make it on the basis that they are large countries with a lot of people and a lot of money and therefore a good place to start. You need to look at the market itself for your product and decide what the actual potential is. So pick on markets which are likely to be suitable and appropriate for your product or service. So the sort of things you should be considering are, in that market, what are the price levels? Who are your competitors? What's the base level that you're going to be going in at, and how does that affect your USP? What is the route into that market? How do people do business? Would you be able to sell directly to your end customer? Will you need to have an intermediary? Perhaps going through a distributor, an agent, perhaps setting up a local office or setting up a joint venture, or even franchising out your product or service. You need to look at barriers. Are there any issues around product regulations, standards, government regulations. You also need to look at issues around the finances of that, not only of potential customers but of country. If it's no point targeting a market that you think has great potential if there are potential foreign exchange restrictions and there is a risk you may not be able to get your money out of the market. Think also about business culture and etiquette in that country. That will factor in how you plan to do business. So once you've looked into that, the next stage is to formulate your action plan. How are you going to start to work to get into that market? That should be your action plan. But again, once you do that, that should be your map to start working into the market. But it's important even at that stage to be flexible. I think the famous general sometimes said that a military strategy only lasts until the first shots are fired. That's perhaps an extreme example, but it's important to be flexible because you may need to reconsider whether your strategy is working and look at other options. When you are starting to look into any particular market, important to protect your intellectual property at a very, very early stage. So trademarks, patents, copyrights, protect your brand as well as the design and the key factors that protect your product or service. I've heard various horror stories over the years of people who were looking to go into a new market at a relatively early stage and doing things informally, and even then they'd found that some enterprising person in that market had actually registered their brand locally and they found themselves at a competitive disadvantage because they weren't in control of the brand anymore. So very important to protect your intellectual property right at the early stages and make sure it's sufficient, make sure it's appropriate for the countries you're going to do business in. So what knowledge will you need? Now this probably looks a little bit scary. It's not intended to be. It's just you don't need to have all the answers to these issues before you start getting out there and doing business, but it's things that you will need to know, things that you will come across. But equally, a lot of these issues are subjects that are going to be covered, I beg your pardon, in future Open to Export webinars. So I'll give you a quick overview of the things you're likely to need to know. So starting off with contractual issues, when you're talking with clients, when you're trying to close contracts or sales, whether it's a one-off order or whether it's ongoing business, you need to be thinking about what payment terms you're offering them. Are you going to give them open credit? Are you going to ask for cash up front? How is that going to work? And equally, if you're selling a product rather than a service, a product that's going to need to be transported, you need to factor in terms of delivery. Somebody's going to have to transport the goods from A to Z. That may be you, it may be your customer, it may be a combination of those. Terms of delivery help to define that, and there are a set of terms of delivery which are known as Incoterms, which are drawn up by the International Chambers of Commerce, which are very useful when you're drawing up contracts, because if you use one of the established Incoterms, it's very clearly stated and understood internationally who pays for what and all the different elements of an international transport journey. So get to know about Incoterms. There are a couple of legal issues you need to be thinking of. Bear in mind that international law in different countries is very different from UK law. Expect the worst, take advice. If you're looking at distributors, agents, check the local law in that country because it can be very different from what applies to us at home, and you can find yourself being put into a position where you're having to answer to commitments or exposure to costs or risks that you didn't expect. An additional factor just to bear in mind, and again nothing to worry about here, is a piece of legislation which is known as the Bribery Act, and there's a slight mistake on the slide. I believe it's the Bribery Act 2011. This is a piece of UK government legislation that's brought in a couple of years, and it's intended predictably to make an offence to either offer or receive bribery. It is also, though, now an offence for failing to prevent bribery, and this is a corporate offence that applies to business and to the directors. And that applies particularly not only if any offence is carried out by a member of staff, but also by representatives. So the reason it's particularly important is that it would apply even if anything was being done by distributors or representatives acting on your behalf. Again, it's nothing to get too worked up about because I'm sure you're all very respectable, reputable business guys anyway, but something to be aware of, particularly if you're doing business in markets where perhaps standards of propriety are not quite the same as we enjoy in Western Europe and you're dealing with local partners. One of the issues that crops up is customs. When goods are transported, they have to be cleared through customs when they leave a country and when they arrive. And the key to that is finding out what your tariff code is for your product. And you can see in the third box there on the right-hand side, there is a link to the Gov.uk website where there is a copy of your customs tariff. So if you don't know it, go to that. You can find it by following the trails of descriptions. Once you've got your tariff code, then that will generally apply. It'll be a similar tariff code in most countries around the world. So that'll be particularly useful because it'll help you or your customer to identify what the rate of duty is when the goods arrive in a country overseas, and that obviously has an impact on the costings that you'll face. Knowing your tariff code will also help you to find out whether your goods may need an export license to be exported. If you've got goods that have a military or a dual use or a strategic application or a works of arts or perhaps drugs or some foodstuffs, you may need to get an export license, so you need to be aware of that before you start taking orders and shipping goods out. There are regulations for VAT when you're exporting goods or when you're selling to other EU countries. That will be covered in a future presentation, so I don't propose to go into that today, but suffice it to say that that's something you need to look at an early stage. And you need to look at what documents are needed around customs compliance. Documents are always needed when goods are cleared through customs. Specific countries may have specific documentary requirements. So going back to the commercial side of things, as I said before, you need to look at what methods of payment. If you're doing business in a market that could be considered risky or with a customer that you're uncertain of, you may want to go for a formal payment mechanism. And there are various mechanisms that you can choose. Examples of those are letters of credit, documentary collections, which are formalized systems where you exchange payment against documentation. Speak to your bank for advice on those. Also consider what currency you're going to be trading in. Are you going to be selling in sterling, dollars, euros, your customer's currency? Whichever currency you pick, how are you going to protect yourself from fluctuations in the marketplace? That can make a big impact on your profit margins if there are fluctuations over a long-term period of an order. And protect your finance. That could be through insuring, through a credit insurance agency, or getting help from UK Export Finance, the government department, who have a range of services to help companies. And one particular piece of advice, find a good freight forwarder. If you're transporting goods, a good freight forwarder can be a godsend. They can give you help on transport, documents, customs, regulations. They will deal with a lot of the red tape that you'll come across, and they can be worth their weight in gold. So one of the questions, quite often, how can you find customers overseas? Well, there are any numbers of ways. Desk research is an easy one. There are any numbers of trade directories, exhibition catalogues, etc. that are available for you to look at. One of the most successful ways can be talking to other companies, friendly competitors, so companies who are in similar products but not directly competing. Who are they doing business with? Who are they buying from? Ask your customers, who else are they getting supplied from? Visit overseas trade shows or exhibit there. You'll put yourself into the marketplace and you'll meet lots of people over a short period of time. There are a range of trade missions that you can go on, which are formalized visits into an overseas country that allow you to research the market or meet potential clients. Those are always good ideas, although you get out of those what you put into them, so you have to do the preparatory work. There are a number of UK events to help you meet overseas buyers, either run by UK Trade and Investment, by chambers of commerce, trade associations, etc. And UK Trade and Investment itself has a business opportunity services online where you can register and tailor your requirements to receive business opportunities from their offices in embassies around the world. And there are a range of services that are offered by UKTI, one of which mentioned here is the Online Market Introduction Service, which is a good way of getting a snapshot and initial pool of names of contacts for potential clients or partners. So who can help you? We've mentioned a couple of these already. UK Trade and Investment have a range of services and benefits. They also have a large staff of local international trade officers, so there's bound to be one near you. If you're not already talking to them, you should be. UK Export Finance, another government department that exists to help companies with financial solutions to exporting, whether that is actually supporting the risk directly, arranging finance to make an export contract happen, supporting, guaranteeing loans, guaranteeing bonds, performance bonds, a range of solutions to help you. And those solutions are available to companies of all sizes. There are a large number of membership associations that are out there to help you, not least of which my own organisation, the Institute of Exports. You'll see the website there. We're particularly keen on raising levels of skills and professionalism, so we're very good at providing information about practical issues, technical issues. There are a range of chambers of commerce, both local, regional ones, and country-specific ones, such as the Arab-British Chambers of Commerce. And lastly, trade associations. For pretty much every industry there is a trade association, and many of those have an international involvement. They may have a links with overseas equivalents, or they may have an active export department that works with the government to help members. So talk to your trade association. And finally, not least, of course, Open to Export, a free online resource, as my colleague has just mentioned, a range of facilities, information and opportunities for you there. So do encourage you to visit that. So a range of services issues to touch on. We'll come on questions in a moment, but I'll pass you back now to Woz for another poll.
Thanks, Mike. I'm launching this poll. I'm conscious that we were scheduled to finish at 3. Having said that, there are 3 or 4 questions that I think are worth putting up. So I'm going to let this run on for a few moments. If people can bear with us for another 5 minutes, if by any chance you've got something that you need to move on to next, then as you exit the webinar, you'll be given a brief survey. It would really help us a lot if you could take 30 seconds to answer the questions, to make sure that we're doing as good a job as we can. Meanwhile, while this is coming up, the answers on the poll, one of the questions that someone's asked, which I'm not sure there's a straight answer for, is what kind of level of markup or increase in margin should you expect or go with when you're looking at exports? I know it's a kind of how long's a piece of string question, but what's your view on that?
I think that's part of the market research. I mean, I think that should actually be covered in one of the future webinars under the issue about pricing. It really depends on the route to market you're going to be doing, whether there are any intermediaries involved, but also what the market price will allow. And bear in mind that in some cases you may be able to get a premium, so you may be able to get a better rate of margin than a domestic manufacturer if you have a cachet as an international supplier, particularly if you're able to take advantage of the UK's great reputation for quality products and services. But in other cases you've got to match your profit margins to what the local market will allow, and that will be dictated by who's involved in the process, what the costs involved are. In some cases, I know people will take on business at lower margins than they will get in the domestic market. Quite often, I think the important thing is to get started, and you quite often find that actually once you get involved in exporting, it becomes, by the time you take the big picture, it becomes overall more profitable, even if 1 or 2 individual markets may be slightly lower margins than you'd expect.
So, I mean, related to that, kind of anyway, someone's asked about the idea of really highlighting the fact that it's a British company. Is that something that you think overall people should be doing as a matter of course, or is it something that depends on the market or the circumstances? Because you alluded to the fact that you might get a premium.
In a lot of cases, I think it's a very good idea. Again, it depends on what sector you're in and what market you're dealing with. I mean, some companies may prefer to market themselves as being global companies or as European companies and perhaps want to play down the Britishness. But there's no doubt that UK does have a very strong reputation, not only in the traditional Commonwealth countries, but in countries where you would think we have relatively little connection. And I know I've lots of stories of people visiting overseas markets and being told by buyers or officials, why aren't there more Brits out there? We want to buy from you because we know your reputation. So I think it can be a good advantage, but don't expect to sell products just because you're British. It's taken as read that the product has got to be of high quality, so you've got to be able to walk the walk as well as talking the talk.
All right, Mike, I'm going to take another 2 minutes and then wrap up, just to organise what's going on. There are quite a few questions where I've been in touch with people directly and given them some sort of answer or suggested that they should be registering on the website. There are quite a few questions on things like cultural issues. And again, I think that's a perfect example where if someone goes onto the Open to Export website, goes into the Q&A forum, I'm going to leave those to be handled afterwards because I don't think any of them are short answers. There is one more question, actually two more questions I'd like you to pick up on. One is, I think it's straightforward, the difference between a distributor and an agent for someone who's getting started on export. Could you just highlight that?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Well, an agent is effectively an outsourced salesman selling on your behalf. So they will be out there in the marketplace selling on your behalf, but earning their living by generating a commission on sales. So they will be involved in the sales process, but when an order comes in, you will actually sell the goods to the end customer. You will bill the end customer, but you will pay your agent a commission. By contrast, a distributor is somebody that resells your products. So they will be a privileged or exclusive client, if you like. So they will buy your products usually in bulk, and they will distribute them in a market. They may have exclusivity in a particular territory or with a particular product range, which will allow them to access that marketplace. But in contrast to an agent, they will actually be your customer. So when you export the goods, you will be exporting them to your distributor. They will then mark the goods up and resell them.
Okay. There are quite a few questions about the Bribery Act, in particular about how you would enforce compliance. But again, I'm going to leave those to the forum because I don't think they're generic answers. I think it very much depends on the market. The one question I will close out with is when it comes to translation, there's quite a few companies that have done well with just a kind of British English approach. Others have invested in translation. Do you have a view on whether you should be investing, how much you invest, some guidelines on the whole aspect of multi-language work when you're exporting?
I would always, unless your product is so British that you feel you can afford to alienate those X% of the world that don't speak English, or you see that as an advantage, then I would always encourage you to invest in it. And I would always say don't scrimp on it. We've all seen examples of products that have had packaging or whatever translated from another language into English, but it's barely recognizable, and you don't want to put yourself into that position. Any materials that you have translated, whether it's instructions, technical guides, packaging, get it professionally done. The same applies with your website. Get it done not only by a native speaker, but by an experienced native speaker, professional interpreter with expertise in that particular discipline, whether it's technical, marketing. And the same applies with interpreters. If you're at a trade show or a trade mission and you hire an interpreter, spend the extra, get a good one. At the cheap end of the market, you can always find a student that speaks English that will do it for pocket money, more or less. But a good interpreter on the spot is actually far better. They're far more. They're helping you to negotiate, particularly in countries where cultural differences apply, and it's not just the words that are spoken, but the gaps between the words or the words that aren't being said. And a good interpreter will help you with that and actually be part of your sales tool for that particular experience. So don't scrimp on it. If you're going to do it properly, I'd say.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to wrap up. Whoever's got control of the slides, could we just move on to the exporter checklist slide? So those of you that are on, I think actually most people have stayed on the line, so thank you everyone for the extra few minutes. There is a new exporter checklist from UKTI. If you use the link, as I've said in the message I sent to everyone, give us a couple of days and this webinar will be live on the website and on our YouTube channel. You'll be able to see the URL. There is an exporter checklist. There's the other webinars coming up, and there's a fair number of questions either from SMEs that are looking for advice. If you could please, the ones I haven't answered or got Mike to answer, put them onto the Open to Export Q&A forum. And there's been quite a few service providers that have talked about how what services they have to offer. We're more than happy to let the SME world know about you. If you register as a service provider on Open to Export, that will be the best place for you to do that. But I'm going to wrap things up now. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and look forward to seeing most of you again on the 18th of February when we talk about country selection and launch strategy. Mike, thank you very much. Audience, thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.